Hey, Bitcoin wealth builders. It's Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 63. It's for Friday, and we have a new president of the United States, which means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But in this episode, we're going to discuss all the possibilities with both Bitcoin macro and geopolitics to change the direction based upon this change of leadership. Now, many people, they bow down to Trump, but this is not about bowing down to Trump. This is about taking the situation that we are in right now as a country and accepting the reality that we can now make massive change if we, the people, hold leadership to account. And the desire for change, I don't think, has ever been greater. And so this episode, Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 63, we're going to be going through all of the different legislation that exists today, all of the opportunities that exist today to get a sea wave of change based upon our current situation. This is going to be all about solutions, and it's going to be about updating everything that's happened this week in Bitcoin, macro, and geopolitics, as always. If you are new to the show, my name is Simon Dixon, and this is where we discuss hard talk about the hardest form of money, how it relates to Bitcoin macro, geopolitics, and how to transition to a world dominated by Bitcoin AI and central bank digital currencies. I've always wanted to build an army of people that own their Bitcoin in self-custody. And for the last 11, where we are now, 2011, 30, last 13 years since speaking at the first Bitcoin conference and writing the first published book in the world, and dedicating 24 years now of my life to money and investing, I want to get as much adoption that are protected for everything that comes next. And from there, we can talk about the opportunities to end the Fed, why we would want to end the Fed, and why it is great for America and the best of the world to expel the Federal Reserve that is occupying America in order to bankrupt the US government, drive it into World War III, and dump it, just like the Bank of England did to the UK during World War I, and transition to a world of communism on a blockchain called central bank digital currencies. But we ain't going to fall for it because we have a lot of tools right now. Our politicians are not going to do it on their own. They will want to keep the status quo. In fact, they will want to avoid being assassinated from those that want to keep the status quo. And so we're going to dig deep into everything. Trump won. Now, how do we end the Fed? And how do we protect ourselves with Bitcoin, even if we can't end the Fed? And how do we expel it from America so that we can take a chain reaction and unwind the crimes of the Federal Reserve in what we are seeing today? All the war crimes, every crime that was funded by taking the US government deep in debt on the proof of weapons network through creating a US dollar Ponzi scheme. And it is starting to reach the point where it is becoming destructive to the American people, destructive to the Middle East, destructive to Asia, destructive to the entire world for the benefit and the expense of a few, because that is the way that the proof of weapons network called fiat currency through debt-based Ponzi schemes was designed in order to service the Federal Reserve shareholders, the private banks, that had a plan of how to get finally to full communism on a blockchain. We're going to dig it deep into that right now. So let's jump in. What are we going to be covering? So firstly, we're going to be covering this week in Bitcoin, and during that, how to end the Fed, strengthen the dollar, and the opportunities that exist for America with Bitcoin as a result of this change of leadership as well. The second thing we're going to be covering is the macro impacts of ending the Fed. Because the Federal Reserve, through all of its propaganda taught through economics, through lobbying the colleges and universities, want you to believe that the inflation is systemic to the entire economy, and Keynesian economics means that you have to get the government deeper into debt in order to stimulate the economy. The third thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be covering this week in geopolitics with the amazing amount of change that world leaders around the world are pushing for. But we're not going to leave them, the politicians and leaders, to it. We're going to recognize the patterns. We're going to recognize Trump's previous performance. And we're going to make sure that we understand what he promised so that when he gets it wrong, or if he doesn't fulfill his promise, we hold him to account, because the geopolitical impact of potentially ending the Fed is not what most people think. Right, so let's dive straight into this week in Bitcoin. So firstly, as predicted, if anyone's a long-term listener of Bitcoin Hard Talk, we've got the last three presidential predictions right. We predicted Trump the first time, we predicted Biden, and then we predicted Trump again. And so we've been able to navigate that successfully throughout this whole journey since I've been broadcasting all of these different election cycles. But as predicted, I said, and I gave all my reasons why I would vote for Trump and why Trump is the chosen one. And we'll make sure that we understand that. So now we have a situation in America where over 250 pro-crypto, let's call it, candidates have been elected into Congress during this election. This was reported by Fox Business. That means that we are going to have a completely different environment to the atrocities of the Biden administration. And I just got to take a little bit of a detour, and I'll cover it again later when we do geopolitics. But here's the massive victory. The massive victory. Biden, Harris, you committed genocide. You killed hundreds of thousands of people, children and women, and it was not a good look, and you lost. The world did not accept and reward your disgusting, murderous behavior of committing the genocide that you continue to fund, and that is poetic justice. Even if Trump continues it, we did not reward that behavior. The world needs to wake up and accept that we will never be in the same world again, where our politicians can weaponize the media and lie to us in order to get away with crimes to protect the dollar based upon the Federal Reserve's policy of propping up the proof of weapons network, which is leading to such homelessness and drug addictions in America as a result of the cost of living crisis and inflation of the debt-based Ponzi scheme that is perpetuated globally through the International Monetary Fund, that is causing hundreds and thousands and millions of deaths all around the world. And you did not get away with it, Biden and Harris. You're out of the office. And for that, I am happy. Okay. So as a result of that, Bitcoin reached new all-time highs. So we passed 76,600. And the Bitcoin lobby, the crypto lobby, was in full force for the first election where I think the Bitcoin lobby had a significant impact, meaning that you could not beat us, banks. And even Trump, he hated Bitcoin back in the day because he saw it as a threat to the dollar. But we explained to him how the countries that embrace Bitcoin are going to be the future leaders of the world. And we get to use this in the game theory that we're sharing together to firstly protect ourselves, protect our companies, and then free our companies of the central banks that are committing these crimes and funding these wars and allowing our governments to be excessively big. So they interfere in all our life to create the legislation that is leading to the lobby groups forcing all of these changes and corrupting our systems. We are ready for change and we have all the tools that we need in front of us, but we got to be one step ahead of the game. And as a result of this, Bitcoin dominance has held above its 60%. Bitcoin dominance is a statistic where it takes the entire crypto market and takes what is the dominance of Bitcoin relative to the entire crypto market. The 25,000 pump and dump schemes and shitcoins that have tried to say, I can create Bitcoin, but cheaper, faster, better, that drives people into gambling behavior in order to try and end up with what everyone really wants, digital hard sound money, which is Bitcoin. And so we are now above a 60% dominance rate, which means that it is really being a Bitcoin-led market relative to all the other things as well. But immediately, there was a victory for the crypto market as well, and we'll dive straight into that. But here's the big one. The big one that you as American people and all of us as a community need to recognize is that whatever the Federal Reserve tries to do to America, America can fight back with Bitcoin, because US Senator Cynthia Lunis released a bill based upon Bitcoin 2024, which was launched at the conference, to ensure that there is an opportunity if the American people and the Senate and the Congress, which are now all aligned, Senate, Congress, and President are all Republican, which means that you can pull that influence together and get Cynthia Lunis's bill through. She said right after the victory, we are going to build a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And that is something that America can have. Now, here's the important point. Don't allow the Federal Reserve to do it. Allow Treasury to do it. Because what did the Federal Reserve do with all the gold that they stole from the American people in 1933? They bankrupted the US government. They used it as collateral. And in 1971, they did not have enough gold to meet the obligations to exchange Federal Reserve notes into gold. So in order to fund the genocidal war of the Vietnamese War, where tunnels were built in order to protect ordinary civilians in Vietnam from the proof of weapons network, and all around the world, we were protesting, I wasn't alive at the time, in order to fight back against the proof of weapons network, they needed more money. And so they Nixon took America off the gold standard because the Federal Reserve stole all of the gold from Treasury and put it into the coffers of the private banks, which is why we don't have an audit of the Federal Reserve, because all of the gold of Americans' Treasury that they stole from the American people was actually used as collateral to transfer to ownership of the Federal Reserve. So what is the strategic reserve strategy? Well, it's quite simple. You take some of the dollars that the proof of weapons network is printing, that you are borrowing from the Federal Reserve, which, by the way, you don't need to do, but they managed to get that, where you were scammed out of the profits from creating money in order to make sure that the American people pay income tax in 1913. But you can print dollars and you can buy Bitcoin. And the strategic reserve asset strategy under RFK, he wants to do 4 million Bitcoin. Under Cynthia Lunis's strategy, she wants to accumulate 1 million Bitcoin over time by doing what El Salvador does. El Salvador's accumulating 1 Bitcoin every day to free itself from the IMF. And RFK even wanted to go to 4 million Bitcoin by accumulating 400 Bitcoin every day, so that eventually, if the game theory works out and the Fed destroys the country, you have a weapon in order to restructure a dollar, just like JFK wanted to do when JFK got assassinated, in order to try and create a debt-free dollar backed by silver issued by Treasury. And so the Federal Reserve and the economic hitmen and the deep state of the CIA and Mossad had to kill him for that one. So he only lost 1 month once he tried to implement it and the policy was reversed. Makes sense in terms of what's happening to Trump right now. Anyway, you can buy Bitcoin and you can phase out the debt, because every 4 years, through the 4-year cycle, those that have dollar cost averaged into Bitcoin have ended up beating the Federal Reserve, the debt, the real estate market, the stock market, and have beaten inflation and have got dollar wealthy over that time. You can keep doing that, and you can slowly, evolutionary transition to having an asset that could rival the debt eventually, as you demonetize the value of that debt, and you end up with digital hard sound money on Treasury's balance sheet. In fact, anyone that understands this will be doing this. And this is what I've been teaching all along for the last 13 years at Bitcoin Hard Talk and this YouTube channel, ever since that first conference, Bitcoin conference. So the states get this. Now, the states certainly want to free themselves from the Fed, because one day you may get a bunch of independent states. Because it used to be that the states would benefit from the profits of creating the dollar in order to reinvest it into America's infrastructure. But the Federal Reserve took those profits and made it for the profits of the private banks. And the private banks created the debt-based Ponzi scheme that bankrupted the US government and got it to the point of solvency, where the Fed is starting to hedge its next strategy, which is why we're getting all of this institutional adoption of Bitcoin at the same time. And we're getting them building layers like Enbridge. And Enbridge is a network of central bank digital currencies so that they can start to build from Switzerland the next hedge of the strategy. Anyway, so Florida chief, the chief financial officer, started advocating for a strategic Bitcoin reserve within Florida and said the Bitcoin is digital gold. Also came out and said that the state holds over $800 million in crypto-related investments anyway already. So Florida's already doing it, and now Treasury can do it, and each state can do it, and you can create a game theoretical race where the states that do this first become the ones that are able to free themselves of the state-level debt. This is the game theory, and this is a global game. And this is the people got to front run the corporations, and the corporations got to front run Wall Street, and Wall Street are now front running the central bank digital currencies before they do the usual pump and dump scheme that the Fed has done 20 times, where they decrease interest rates. We'll go more into the macro section, and then hike those rates in order to hold the economy to ransom, so that they end up with forcing the US government deeper and deeper and deeper into debt. And when it all goes wrong, they take us into a world war in order to ensure that the Ponzi scheme keeps going. So what else is Trump saying that he is going to do? Well, he said that he would like to eliminate tax on crypto tokens within the USA. He made an expenditure. He bought something with Bitcoin leading up in his campaign and said, why would you need to pay tax in order to buy a coffee with Bitcoin? Makes a lot of sense. Hold him to it. We have a good congressional team now that all understand crypto, all understand Bitcoin. And we've got this 4-year cycle to implement these changes before Bitcoin goes to the next halving cycle and the game theory plays out as the world slowly evolutionary transitions to the fact that digital hard sound money exists and is not connected to any country and is apolitical. Trump also said that there would be no capital gains tax on Bitcoin. If he can get that through, that was a promise. We quote Trump. He said, Bitcoin is money, and you have to pay capital gains tax if you use it to buy a coffee. He doesn't think that makes sense. What else did Trump say that he is going to do that we need to all hold him to account to? Because now we enter into this world where you have an aligned Congress, an aligned House, and an aligned president where we can get shit done. And I say we, I'm not even American, but I know that the Federal Reserve controls the entire world, and my country is just a conduit. Because the Federal Reserve is actually aligned with the same family that took over the Bank of England and bankrupted the UK government and has turned the UK into a simple shell for the military-industrial complex, big pharma, and the banking industry as well. We have no economy left. Germany is being destroyed by the European Central Bank. The European Central Bank was created by the same family through the Bank for International Settlements and the same designers of the Bretton Woods scheme that got the world into debt through the World Bank and the economic hitmen at the International Monetary Fund. It all comes back to the family that bankrupted the UK government, that funded all of that colonialism and all that crazy wars and allowed the government to perpetrate crimes against humanity. But what else did Trump say he'd do? He said he's going to fire Gary Gensler, the head and chairman of the SEC, that is a conduit for the Federal Reserve. If you've watched previous episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk, I shared in real time how the chairman, Gary Gensler, met with SBF, wouldn't meet with any industry, executed Operation Choke Point 2.0 that led to the destruction of savers and the American people's savings through an Israeli shell company like Celsius, and SBF, the fraud that was the only person that was able to get that because they were funneling off money to Ukraine and bribing Democrat and Republican politicians, mainly Democrat. And then they covered all that up because Gary Gensler didn't want that part to be seen. And the DOJ dropped those charges, put SBF in prison, and then suddenly started approving BlackRock and Bank of New York Mellon to try and take on the industry and make sure that everyone gave up their self-custody Bitcoin and held it with BlackRock, so that if the government or the Fed wants to create another pump and dump scheme, like they did in the roaring 20s that led to the Great Depression, that crashed stocks and ended up having FDR confiscate all the American people's gold that was stolen by the Fed, that was meant to belong to Treasury in the first place, by confiscating and making everyone swap, the American people swap their gold for $20 of a shitcoin called the dollar in the pump and dump scheme that was then used to manipulate again and again and again. Anyway, Gary Gensler's been suing these exchanges and these projects left and right. The ones that are fraud should be, but the ones that were done with the SEC, like SBF, we get to expose those types of things. Let's get rid of Gary Gensler. He's a bad actor. He's chair of the SEC. He's proven that he is not acting in America's best interest. And Trump said that he will fire. What did the SEC do, though? It took companies like Coinbase. Full disclosure, I'm a shareholder in Coinbase in the private equity round through Bank to the Future before it went public at a $100 billion valuation. But the CEO of Coinbase, Brian Armstrong, says that the next SEC chair should withdraw all frivolous cases and issue an apology to the American people. Once Trump fires Gary Gensler came out and said, no, you can't fire us, just like the chairman of the SEC said, I am above the law. And it doesn't matter if the American people, it doesn't matter if the American Congress wants to get rid of me. I am the chair of the Federal Reserve. Screw you, President-elect Trump. I'm in charge, not you. Now, why do I think that this is going to be good for the crypto markets in general? Well, Trump just before, and I covered it in previous things. I'm not a fan of the project, but it has its utility. It's got, bad shareholders that go back to Mossad in through the company at World Liberty Financial. But he said that he's going to be launching 3 things at World Liberty Financial. If you want to go deeper into this, I covered it in earlier broadcasts. Head over to simondixon.com. Go to the blog and you can type in World Liberty Financial and you can find previous blogs and previous broadcasts for anyone that wants to go deep into it. But the project was a little bit of a flop. It only raised, I haven't looked recently again, about 14 million of about 300 million. And that was because it valued itself at the crazy valuations. Look, the successful projects, I invested in the Ethereum ICO using some of my Bitcoin. But in comparison, you get these multi-billion-dollar valuations. But ETH, when it launched, it was about a $24 million effective valuation. And it gave people a 15x return. If you want to support your token holders, when you're creating things, I'm not saying you should be whether you should invest in these things. Bitcoin is the innovation, but that's why these fundraisers don't succeed, because you've actually got to create an environment where there is returns for your community, which is what I believe was one of the success points of Ethereum, whatever you think about that project. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is, what does it mean for us? How do we end the Fed? How does it further humanity? How do we use Bitcoin adoption? Well, there will be regulations around stablecoins as a result of this, because Trump's project said that it's going to be having a treasury-backed stablecoin. It also, Trump's project by his family, said that it's going to have a DeFi platform, which is built on top of Ethereum, which means you need to hold Ethereum in self-custody, which means that Bitcoin in self-custody is needed in order to allow that project to succeed. So this means that Americans get to protect themselves from BlackRock by owning Bitcoin in self-custody. It also said that it's going to have a governance token. I'm no fan of that governance token, each to their own. But what does that mean? It means that the SEC, when you get rid of Gary Gensler, is going to have to get clear. Is this regulated by the CFTC as a commodity like Bitcoin and ETH? Or is this a security? And what does security regulations look like for a governance token? Because Trump's project, his family project, is going to have a token, which is what he was selling. It was going to be locked in for 1 year. It was sold to accredited investors. It currently is right now. But what is the regulations going to look like? That has to be solved. And now the SEC can work with industry and the CFTC can work with industry. But there will be one perpetrator that is probably not acting in America's best interest, which is Jerome Powell from the Federal Reserve that said, I'm in charge of you, Trump. You can't fire me. Why? Because he is executing a strategy that bankrupts America, bankrupts the banks next time he hawks rates with all those unrealized gains, and consolidates banks and hands them over to the shareholders of the Federal Reserve like JP Morgan, so that they can eventually be consolidated into a central bank digital currency, which some of the technology is currently being beta tested with FedNow, which eventually can be communism on a blockchain, and it can be used to take that world central bank digital currency, which is being set up in the macro section and geopolitical section. And Trump said that he will make sure that it is not possible to have a CBDC at the federal level. So he said that he's going to do it. Will he do it? We shall see. We shall see. He also said that he's going to protect self-custody of those that want to hold those Bitcoins. He also said one of the early Bitcoin advocates that has done over a decade in prison for creating a technology that allowed people to engage in transactions online, peer-to-peer, that ended up being used by people that want to sell drugs online. Russ Ulbricht, he said he's going to free him when he comes in to power in January. So Russ Ulbricht will be brought back to the Bitcoin community if Trump fulfills his promises as well. He also said he's going to set up a Department of Government Efficiency. And who's going to be on that Department of Government of Efficiency? Well, you've all watched it. Elon Musk is going to be the big advocate for it. And Elon Musk is a big fan of trolling around the shitcoin Doge. And so Doge obviously had a pump as well. But Elon Musk is going to be a part of that government efficiency. And almost all of the members are now pro-Bitcoin and pro-crypto in order to ensure that that efficiency can be implemented, for example, in the Bitcoin mining industry, where electricity can be used in order to repurpose for Bitcoin. And that can then be used in order to support an AI industry or the growth of a renewable energy industry or the growth of a nuclear energy industry to actually disrupt the Fed by having a strategic reserve asset that benefits from all of this innovation as Americans hold Bitcoin in self-custody, and it supports an industry that supports the growth of energy and renewable energy by rewarding those miners that are mining Bitcoin efficiently and repurposing the fact that America is the largest exporter of natural gas as well. And who else is going to be on that? Well, one of the people that are going to be on that is the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, who basically is the custodian. That institution, Cantor Fitzgerald, is the custodian of the treasuries of USDT, the stablecoin. And what is a stablecoin? A stablecoin is disruption to fractional reserve banking, so that people can exit fractional reserve banking and have full reserve banking. And the government is hedging its strategy by allowing this technology to grow, because the dollars come in, they lend them to the government, and then you have disruption where those full reserves through stable coins can give an alternative to the fractional reserve debt-based Ponzi scheme. And we can expel the banks And eventually, obviously, the Federal Reserve will want to get their grubby mitts on that. And the OCC, the regulation department, the protector of the currency and the debt-based Ponzi scheme for the Federal Reserve, will want to regulate that and replace stablecoins with CBDCs because they want to control the whole damn thing. So there is this resistance movement where people can issue stablecoins, and we can have disruption in banking by not weaponizing the Federal Reserve in order to stop the innovation, as has happened in Operation Choke Point 2.0 throughout this whole process. So USDT has now pretty much become strategically important to the US government. And Howard Lutmeg, who is the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, efficiency team. And so people have always talked about this FUD event where Tether unwinds. Firstly, it doesn't matter. You can unwind it, replace it with another stable coin because it is all backed, because Cantor Fitzgerald has confirmed that as well, that the treasuries are held through custody. But because that is now the 18th largest lender to US government, as we enter into this world of Federal Reserve, fractional reserve banks, CBDCs through the Federal Reserve, USDT stablecoins, non-fractional reserve, and Bitcoin strategic reserve, digital hard sound money that can back the whole damn thing as we transition. They will be, he's going to be on the team as well. This means, what is Cantor Fitzgerald doing in the future? Well, they beta tested Bitcoin-backed loans. It's not for me. I believe it's haram. I'm not going to be putting my Bitcoin and doing Bitcoin-backed loans against it. But collateralized loans are very different to money created in a debt-based Ponzi scheme that took usury and codified it into the dollar by the Federal Reserve, where you can't even exit the usurious system. At the same time, now we can move to hard money being the collateral, and Islamic banks can launch interest-free loans through, not-for-profits based upon collateral, based upon Bitcoin, which is digital hard sound money, which takes usury out of the system. The possibilities are endless. This can be a deleveraging scenario backed by Bitcoin if they choose, and the institutions that lever up too far, they can create those systemic risks, but we can enter into a new era of the financial system based upon Bitcoin as well. And we don't have to take out the whole system. As I said, you can evolutionary transition, or the Fed can blow up the whole thing, take us to World War III, peak centralization, and then the monetary system is designed after that. So we need to smarten up, because previously when they did that, they did this without people understanding the consequences of the Bretton Woods debt-based Ponzi scheme. Under the current Biden and Harris administration, they actually had a bill in order to treat Tether and stable coins completely unfriendly. And so hopefully that can have an overhaul under this new efficiency department. Regulations are going to be working with industry to actually protect consumers if this can be done right. And so that's what it is to look forward to on the Bitcoin side. What other announcements did we have in the rest of the world before we cover the macro side? There was an announcement from EU's largest telecom provider, Deutsche Telekom, that is going to be using Bitcoin mining to utilize surplus energy. This is the type of awesome thing that we can see while Europe is being bankrupted by the European Central Bank, that is holding these countries to ransom with the debt-based Ponzi scheme of the euro, that is being weaponized by America through terrorist attacks like Nord Stream pipeline in order to create inflationary cycles that creates cost of living crisis and destroys it so that they can start implementing trade wars. And those trade wars end up ruining their relationships with the global community, while the CIA and the deep state and the Federal Reserve drive us into World War III by reversing all of the peace agreements with Iran, with China, and end up creating scenarios that drive us to World War III that could eventually end up destroying the dollar and putting us on a central bank digital currency so that the forces at the Federal Reserve can dump America We must resist. We must fight back. And so the Deutsche Telekom is doing that by taking its surplus energy and using it to utilize Bitcoin to create investments in the future of its industry as well. So it can monetize excess, money through Bitcoin. This is an industry that has been, really growing within Texas in America. It's supporting the emergence between artificial intelligence and Bitcoin mining. This can be used to power a network where we have open source artificial intelligence to resist against those that are using artificial intelligence in a closed source environment in order to fund and create these wars, these AI wars that are being fought. The genocide that is being fought through AI at the moment is all being done through closed source artificial intelligence, funded by companies like Peter Thiel's Palantir. And that is being used and weaponized in order to kill people using artificial intelligence. We can take that open source and follow the Bitcoin model. A little bit of a laugh. Remember the German government? It sold its Bitcoin right before the pump, marking the bottom of the country. And we said right here on Bitcoin Hard Talk that we will never let the German government know. So not only do they occupy themselves by the European Central Bank, they sell the Bitcoin strategic reserve that they had, and they created a crash in the market so that you that were watching Bitcoin Hard Talk, you were watching it, and I was telling you accumulate and suck up those Bitcoin from the German government. I'm sorry, the German population. The German government is no longer acting in your interest, which is why it is creating civil unrest and violence for anyone that's trying to protest against the atrocities of the wars of the governments and the genocide that it is sending all of its equipment to Israel in order to kill children and women. Karma pays, but you, the people, need to protect yourself with Bitcoin in self-custody in order to protect yourself from the occupation of these central banks that are destroying our countries and economies all around the world. So congratulations, the German government. You robbed your people of the strategic reserve asset as well. What else did we see? Well, we started to even see capitulations from other blockchains. Now, you know that I focus on Bitcoin. I use things like Ethereum as in the investment bucket in order to convert the stakes into Bitcoin and have an income strategy to protect myself in case my company or anything gets disrupted by artificial intelligence. And I believe everyone should be doing that. I'm going to be covering more about this when I launch in 2025, the Bitcoin Wealth Builder free video series to help everyone put together a strategy that I've covered. If you want to get the previous one that I did, head over to simondixon.com, head over to Wealth Building Solutions, get yourself a login to the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal, and you can find all the previous videos where I even invested live and showed people exactly how I did it. I'll review that and show how I protected myself, even by starting from scratch with no income, because everyone was telling me you were lucky, Simon, because you got in early. But anyway, now these alternative blockchains are even pivoting to building their technology around Bitcoin, which is going to be creating an interesting trend as well. Cardano, for example, Charles Hoskinson, the founder, came out and said that is going to be, he reversed his stance on Bitcoin. Before he was saying that Bitcoin's a shitcoin and everyone should be looking at Cardano because it's cheaper, faster, better, all the same spiel that we see that wrecks people when they listen to it. Well, Cardano layer 1 is now pivoting to become a Bitcoin layer 2. And I think you're going to see this from more and more as we enter into a wave of crypto, innovation-friendly environment within America. If we can hold Trump and the administration to account and the regulators and actually get good actors that are acting in America's interest as well. So that's an interesting one to watch. We will keep watching it. And as a geek, the finance geek that I am, I'll keep reporting on it. MicroStrategy as well. They flipped Coinbase in terms of their market cap. Coinbase was tivering around $50 billion. And now MicroStrategy is $50 billion. They became the most successful company on the S&P, simply of all 500 companies, by using Bitcoin on their balance sheet and putting a strategic reserve of Bitcoin in order to utilize the fact that debt investors can lend money to MicroStrategy. They can use that to buy Bitcoin, just as American Treasury can do to protect themselves from the Federal Reserve. And what did MicroStrategy announce? A $42 billion capital plan in order to use this to build a bigger treasury and ATM essentially using Bitcoin. Why 42 billion? $21 billion in debt and $21 billion of equity. Now, what would happen to this company as it's becoming such a valuable powerhouse? We covered this in previous broadcasts, where if America wanted to get that Bitcoin strategic reserve because you didn't implement the bill, it could end up nationalizing MicroStrategy in a forced extreme circumstance. It could say to everyone that owns Bitcoin in the BlackRock ETF, we will give you dollars just like they did in 1933, which is why you should own Bitcoin in self-custody. But many won't listen. It's okay, because the vast majority of Bitcoin is owned in self-custody. Why? Because we front run the Operation Choke Point 2.0, where Gary Gensler and the Federal Reserve tried to take down our industry and get everyone to put their Bitcoin in BlackRock. But anyway, it doesn't matter. You know, that can happen for those people that are investing. But MicroStrategy is building a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And my guess is if companies want to accumulate over 250,000 Bitcoin, there's no other way of doing it at the speed and at that price than having MicroStrategy. So America's hedging itself. You've got MicroStrategy, you've got Bitcoin in self-custody, bad for you. And hopefully you will allow them to do it the correct way, which is buy it by printing dollars through the Cynthia Linus bill for national security reasons as well. So MicroStrategy is continuing to scale that as well, which is creating a leveraged Bitcoin play, and people continue to invest in that as well. There was a comment from the US Treasury. The US Treasury pointed out with a public statement that crypto stablecoins growth is increasing demand for treasury bills. This is what I was talking about earlier. So because the demand for treasury bills is in proportion to the growth of stablecoins, we can slowly transition with this technology to not only end the Fed, but end the Fed and end fractional reserve banking if we choose, and take back the profits from money creation over to treasury, which can significantly reduce the national debt and taxes. And you can even transition the fractional reserves bank evolutionary, as I was presenting before Bitcoin was launched, to the UK government when I was a part of the monetary reform community that led to the creation of the book, Bank to the Future, Protect Your Future Before Governments Go Bust. If you are a geek like me and you want to see how I was sharing this and published it in 2011, head over to the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. You can get a digital copy of that book for free rather than buying it on Amazon. If you do buy it on Amazon, the money doesn't come to me. I'll make sure that that gets redistributed, or you can have the free copy by signing up to the Bitcoin Hard Talk free membership portal. But remember, stable coins are non-fractional reserve banking, and governments are starting to recognize the value in it. And so this is creating a way where eventually you may be able to, because there is now all this innovation being built on top of Bitcoin, stable coins can be integrated on top of Bitcoin, and we can also disrupt the banking market in a systemic risk event. And obviously the Fed will want to protect itself with that central bank digital currency. But Trump said that he would make that illegal in America if, and this gives America all the tools that it needs in order to end the Fed. This is why government agencies and the Feds are likely to, not abandon and make a stable coin and unwind and come after Tether, because essentially Tether is now strategically important to the Treasury and the US government, which is why I believe it's still continuing to be embraced. But there's a clear unwind strategy in case anyway. This does not require the Fed. That's the important point. The Fed will try and say, no, you need us. You need us to regulate the fractional reserve banks. You need us to be the lender of last resort. We can't have non-fractional reserve banking. We can't have debt-based money, and we certainly can't have dollars that reduces the amount of tax and pays down the national debt that actually allows America to free itself from the Fed, which is why Jerome Powell exerted his influence and said, I'm the boss, not Trump. Certainly doesn't want to shift in power. This is why they're going to advocate for central bank digital currencies, and we will cover it every week on Bitcoin Hard Talk. And we need to make sure that we get more stablecoin adoption as we get more Bitcoin adoption, and we allow the government to protect itself from the occupation of the Federal Reserve. Right. That's all I got for Bitcoin. We're going to be moving into the macro section. And in the macro section, I'll do it again. I'll talk about the opportunities that exist for America to free itself and why ending the Fed is actually not what the Federal Reserve will make you think it is on the macro side. I'll also cover what happened this week in macro. If you are enjoying it, please do make sure that the company Google that owns YouTube does not want anyone seeing this content, especially the geopolitical side. So I rely upon you sharing it. Please do retweet. Please do repost. Please do add a comment if you're watching the recording. Please do jump into the live chat. Head over to YouTube, or you can carry on watching this on X or any of the other networks as well. But do me a favor, repost. I'm going to take a quick water, and then we're going to do the macro section. But if you're enjoying this content, I rely on you to share it. I want more and more people owning Bitcoin in self-custody. Please do me a favor. Repost, like, do that right now. 1, 2, 3. Okay, now that I'm protecting my voice, let's jump right into the macro section. What happened this week? Well, the Federal Reserve Chairman this week, yesterday, Jerome Powell, he came out and said that he would not resign if President Trump asked him to. At the same time, he said, I'm cutting rates by 0.25%. So they are going into the same cycle that we have always seen. Inflation is still a problem for American people, but he wanted to pump the market. So he gave 0.5% rate cut. And now he's giving 0.25% rate cut. And as predicted, you would have known that if you were watching the show, he will likely give a 0.25% rate cut in December. Why? Because then the Fed can hold the American economy to ransom. And if Trump tries to interfere and tries to rejuvenate the economy and asks the Fed, then the Fed can hike rates, destroy the banking system, consolidate the area, get the government deeper into debt, blame the crash of the economy on Trump, and take the world into civil unrest and external war for the wars that it is funding from the military-industrial complex, and make sure that we're aware of it. This is why we need to stop covering up for the Fed. This is why we need to stop watching traditional media. This is why we need to continue watching Bitcoin Hard Talk. This is why we need to educate ourselves. This is why we need to understand what is happening in Israel, because Israel is a shell company for covering up these operations as well. And they are saying that it is something else. We need to understand these trends. And that's what we're going to be covering. So in the macro side, you got another rate cut. We know we have seen this. We have seen this 20 times from the Federal Reserve in 1913, since it scammed Congress on the 23rd of December, 2013, and saying that no bill will be passed that is significant. And then they got the income tax in order to kill, essentially, the savings of the American people and create that second tax through inflation and take the profits from money creation away from the American people and hand it over to their shareholders that designed the scam in the first place through that creature from Jekyll Island. And now Jerome Powell is saying, I am above the law. According to the Fed chairman, it does not matter. But who is fighting it? There's one person fighting it, and it just happens to be the only person that exposed that every member of Congress is bought by AIPAC, which is the Israeli lobby, which is taking the Federal Reserve's money and siphon it back to bribe politicians through Mossad operations like Epstein to blackmail all those politicians if they won't accept the money. and then try and assassinate them just when Trump is coming into power. But Thomas Massie exposed all that. And he was the one that introduced the End the Fed bill. And the End the Fed bill exists if it can get traction, get the order right, get the Bitcoin strategic reserve asset, get the stablecoin regulations, get the End the Fed bill. America, you can end the occupation and stop listening to the CIA, which is controlled by Mossad, and stop making Israel great again, and instead focus on making America great again by expelling the Fed. In the End the Fed bill, maybe I'll cover it in a future broadcast, but basically it's just transferring assets to Treasury, taking back the profits from money creation, reducing the size of the government, returning to the Constitution. And why not combine it with a Bitcoin strategic reserve asset so that even if it goes wrong, you have an asset that can protect yourself, whatever happens, wherever the Fed and the deep state tries to take you into World War III. By the way, you can print debt-free money. America did it in the past. Don't listen to the propaganda saying this is communism. That's not communism. That is constitutional money. Communism is the Fed. The Fed is taking you to communism, central bank digital currency. They even funded all of your university education so they could create a wave of millions that are pushing Keynesian economics, that are pushing monetarism, which says you have to have inflation, which is pushing excessive debt. There is an agenda. Recognize digital hard sound money, recognize debt-free money, because America before 1913 had a state banking system. And it had it before that as well. And the founding fathers warned America and said their biggest regret was not making it illegal for the government to borrow, which was Thomas Jefferson. And the assassinations that happened with the first central bank and the second central bank. Learn American history. Behind every assassination is an attempt to remove the Federal Reserve or the precursors based upon the family that funded it in the first place, which all goes back to the Bank of England and that incestuous relationship as well. You can pay down the debt. You can increase the reserves of the bank. So taking all those assets, putting it here, you can say to the banks, the only thing that would be affected is the bank's share price. That's it. You could say, move to 100% reserve, issue stable coins. Every time we print money, you could pay down the debt and that debt could increase the bank reserves. And now suddenly you've deleveraged the entire system. It doesn't mean you don't have to have debt. You can have debt, which is peer-to-peer lending. They can become stablecoin issuers. Our industry has already proven that it can work. They don't want you to know that. They want you to think that you need the Federal Reserve. I wonder why. I wonder who told you that. Could it be the Federal Reserve itself? Could it be the banks that are the shareholders of the Federal Reserve? Could it be the bank's share prices that would crash without crashing the economy and allow the American people to deleverage and allow the American people to reduce their tax, reduce their debt, and allow the American people the breath to be able to accumulate Bitcoin as this transition happens? Well, if America doesn't do it, BRICS will do it. And so BRICS countries, they now control 20% of the world's gold. And Russia has now legalized Bitcoin mining. China will probably do the same. And as the BRICS currency after the conference and the payment system integrates, Bitcoin will be the perfect strategic reserve asset in order to transition countries that want to join the BRICS layer if the dollar's not going to do it. But what if they both did it? Maybe we could return to a peace environment without the military-industrial complex being funded by the money laundering and printing of the Federal Reserve. And even Saudi Arabia, on the macro side, it says that it is open to using a petro yuan for its oil. And so Saudi Arabia, which didn't turn up to the BRICS conference, met up with Antony Blinken, chose the proof of weapons network, but now Trump could decide to strengthen a dollar with a Bitcoin strategic reserve and maybe win back some of that petrodollar that could have gone to a petro yuan. And maybe we could get a petro yuan and the BRICS side could say, we'll do it first. Game theory at its finest. regulate the central bank digital currencies by opening up the market, having Bitcoin as a perfect apex predator, as it were, that makes these stable coins and CBDCs and everything better as well. Anyway, so Saudi Arabia said that it's open to doing some of its oil settlement in a yuan dollar as well as a petrodollar. Now remember, Treasury owns no gold anymore, because the last time this was tried to be audited, it turned out it was the collateral behind all of the wartime debt, and the Fed has just simply stolen it, which is why they don't want to audit the Fed, because the American people would realize the theft that came from that. So you can reclaim all of that gold if you want, but the Fed wouldn't want you to know that. You can reclaim all of those assets. You can create debt-free money based upon deleveraging the reserves of the banks. You can end the Fed if you choose, and you will either go to World War III to do it, or you can do it evolutionary rather than revolutionary. The choice is yours, everyday Americans, because all of the tools that you need, thanks to Bitcoin, exist as well. OPEC, those that determine the price of oil, they will be meeting on the 1st of December. And so we saw a little bit of an oil price drop by about 6% to $71.6 a barrel from $75 because Israel did not target aggressively oil fields in the retaliation. Last week, I did a celebration of 16 years of Bitcoin where I went through all of each of the years. Make sure you go back and watch that. But I didn't cover any of the geopolitical side. But we had a little bit of a correction in the oil price. There is a little bit of geopolitics. I don't want to go too deep based upon Iraq, the reserves of China, India buying oil from Russia as well, and then exporting that to Europe as a result. We'll cover those in future broadcasts. Basically, there's going to be the meeting in December. So I'll make sure we cover that in future episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube. YouTube will give you a notification, and make sure you are a member of the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal, and I'll send you an email around that to make sure you are up to date and you can prepare. Now, a warning message came from the European Union. The European Union, as part of its strategy, told that all European Union nations and people should advise households to be prepared to be self-sufficient for a minimum of 72 hours in the event of an emergency. They are prepping people because they know that the CIA is in charge, Mossad is in charge, MI5 is in charge, the Bank of England is in charge, the European Central Bank is in charge, and they are not listening to government. So they're giving those warnings. When they give those warnings, we listen. It either means two things. They're trying to fear you into massive law changes that are more oppressive. And normally, if they can't get it that way, they take you to war. And then during war, they just change the laws anyway in time for their central bank digital currency. What the EU should be advising, if they were acting as good actors, is that European citizens should be stockpiling Bitcoin and dumping the euro shitcoin and buying Bitcoin with their stockpile, which is their strategic protection. And the European countries should be doing it to protect themselves from the European Central Bank as well. But remember, the ECB came out, we covered it in previous broadcasts, and issued us a warning. They said that Bitcoin is bad because it may end up creating wealth inequality, because those that own Bitcoin will become wealthy, and those that don't earn Bitcoin won't have any Bitcoin and aren't able to get the wealth, which is correct. The answer to that is do what I've always been saying in Bitcoin Hard Talk, not financial advice. Spend less than you earn, invest the difference, save in Bitcoin, dollar cost average every month, own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. Do it for 4 years. You'll never look back. Everyone that's done that, can't say it will happen again, we guarantee, but everyone that has done that has been rewarded. But the European Central Bank wants to spin that in terms of this is a bad thing because of wealth inequality. It is a bad thing because of wealth inequality. But what do? We share Bitcoin hard talk. We share the wealth. We share the love. We share the promise of Bitcoin. We teach self-custody. We try and get as many people in as possible. We want as many people owning Bitcoin in self-custody because those that don't are going to be dependent upon you, and you need to become the right side of that change. And that's the protection. They don't want you to know that either, though, as well. So that's everything on the macro side. Now let's jump into the geopolitics side. If you're just joining me, we've covered everything that Bitcoin can do now that we have this possibility of a change of leadership. And on the macro side, you have all the tools you need to end the Fed. The deep state doesn't want you to do that. Why? Because of the geopolitical situation. So let's go through an update of the geopolitics and make sure that we are warned from what Trump has done in the past when he has been guided by the deep state, so that we can try and make sure we recognize it and not allow it to happen again. So I'm going to go through the geopolitics side. I'm going to just take a bit of water. Do me a favor, comment below this video. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you'd like me to cover in future episodes. Share the love, tag me, let me know what you're thinking. Repost it, like it, share it. I rely upon you. I will keep giving content. I will keep protecting. But I need you to reciprocate slightly as well. Now we'll go through the geopolitics side. Okay, so immediately after it was determined that Trump had won and Harris conceded, Trump has now, from today, has spoken to 76 leaders so far, building relationships, deciding what the future negotiations are. Here's the most important part. We need to make sure that we get change. And as I said, Biden-Harris, you committed the genocide. We said that you are no longer able to get in power. The Zios are freaking out because now it's not good to support genocide. Now it's not good to support CIA and Mossad operations on behalf of the Israeli government. Now it's not good to support the military-industrial complex where BlackRock owns all of those shares and uses American colleges to siphon off endowment funds, which reinvest, and now BlackRock has all the voting shares in all of those people through ETFs by taking away the voting rights of American people that own those shares. And now the whole industry is wound up, and America is being used as a host and a tool as it gets the government deeper into debt, the people deeper into debt, and the companies deeper into debt. But who did he meet? Well, some of those, let's just go through a few highlights. He met with Bukele, and he met with Satan Yahoo, who is the perpetrator of the genocide, but he's not in it. He's also doing with Smotrich and Gavir. He's the one that's meant to cover it up while the media engages in the cover-up operation as well, causes all the confusion. And most importantly, Trump said he will be meeting with Putin soon, because we're going to go through following the money of now that BlackRock owns approximately 47% of Ukraine, because this was a military-industrial complex scam in the first place, which is killing the Ukrainian people by deliberately going against the peace treaty agreements and expanding NATO in order to collateralize those assets by the International Monetary Fund, which was propped up by the Bank of England with the guarantee of the government, which shifted our government and put Keir Starmer in as a NATO first policy. We get it now. We can call it out in real time. So share Bitcoin Hard Talk so more people understand it as well. Now, immediately Putin and Russia came out and said, now that Trump's in power, they would like to work with Trump, but their goals of the war in Ukraine remain unchanged and will be achieved. And so we know what this means. The evils of the military-industrial complex profited significantly. They gave half of Ukraine to BlackRock, and the other parts will go to Russia. And they killed Ukrainians in the process in order to try and weaken Russia so that Israel could further its goals of the military industrial complex and execute the strategy of the Fed and use NATO in order to bankrupt governments all around the world for the profits of the military industrial complex, so that when all of those banks crash, you can give everyone their deposit of a CBDC powered by artificial intelligence, which happens to be the industry that is being pushed by taking all of that money, investing it into Silicon Valley, sending it back to Israel, and using it to bribe politicians, and now beta testing an AI-based genocide that is going to be sold to dictators around the world to oppress people and back the one global central bank digital currency if we allow them to get their way. So anyway, Trump met with the Israeli Prime Minister, Netanyahu. Netanyahu congratulated Trump on his victory. He said that it is the greatest comeback in history. And basically, Trump, throughout the whole campaign, has publicly been a big supporter of Israel, so that Netanyahu is happy. And despite 2 assassination attempts, by being able to say that you are aligned with Israel, then all of the media propaganda calms down, and there's only those competing forces which were voting for the Democrats that I think contributed partially, because he said, in order to me to be president, I need to appease the Israel lobby. So he took all of that money as well. But we need to make sure we know what that money came with. And we need to keep an eye on that, because Trump is owned by the Israeli lobby, and there would have been price tickets that came with that. But this is his last term. Can we, the people, make sure that this goes in the direction away from World War III by recognizing what's happening? Well, let's look around the world. Who else did Trump speak to? Well, Turkish President Erdogan. He came out and he congratulates Trump. He said, my friend Donald Trump, congratulated him on winning. And he also said that he hopes that Turkey and US relations will strengthen. Remember, Turkey is a member of NATO, but it is a problematic side, because if you follow the money, you know that Turkey allows oil to get through to Israel at the same time as deeply condemning Israel and saying that it wants to join BRICS. So Turkey is a hugely important relationship to maintain. Turkey is basically moving closer and closer to BRICS at the BRICS summit, and it's moving closer and closer to the East. It's further and further away to the US. So if you can end the Fed, if you can give a Palestinian state, if you can stop Israel committing the atrocities, then we can move to further and further towards peace as well. Erdogan basically said he wants to resolve the Palestinian issue and end the war in Ukraine. And he wants to work with Trump, and he wants to make sure that Trump fulfills the goal of doing both. Remember, Turkey recently, in the time that we have done the past broadcast, it recently threatened that it would invade Israel in order to help support Gaza. We know that those are words, but these are the types of things that the Turkish people are demanding of the government. And so they said that they would join that war if this doesn't escalate. Everything seems to be waiting for the change of leadership, because Biden and Harris were funding the genocide as they were completely complicit in this atrocities. But as we said, oil, follow the money, you can get the truth, don't follow the words. We also had congratulations from the Indian Prime Minister, Modi. Modi and Trump, they were basically renowned for his sanctions on Iran. And India now, from the BRICS summit, has funded the building of Iran's largest shipping port. And so that route is being built. And so Americans' relations, at the same time as ignoring Israel, saying, America, please go to war with Iran and kill American troops for us because we want to be the sole nuclear power. And we want you to remove the nuclear deal, even though Israel doesn't have an illegal nuclear deal. And they ask America to sanction Iran instead of sanctioning Israel because Israel is breaking the laws, and Iran wanted a nuclear deal due to the US expansion of the ports on its border and the fact that Israel wanted to take out their nuclear plants. We ended up with Abraham Accords and all the stuff that led to the crazy situation we are in right now. So remember that as well. So these geopolitical relationships, negotiation and diplomacy makes a lot more sense than the path of the military industrial complex, NATO, and the deep state and the Fed. There was also, remember that infamous meeting between Trump and Zelensky? Trump wants to end this war. It wants to engage in diplomacy. It wants to ignore Boris Johnson that said, don't do peace talks. Make sure more Ukrainians die. Make sure that the NATO makes more money. Make sure that BlackRock ends up with most of the land of Ukraine. And make sure Zelensky siphons off money and gets rich in the process. But anyway, Zelensky had to capitulate and come out, and he said he's looking forward to working with Trump and implementing Ukraine's new victory plan. But this victory plan is not in line with Trump's policy. It's the opposite of what Trump says he wants and what he will do. And he said he will end it within 24 hours of becoming into power. He said he would do it before he gets into power, but will give some grace. And that's why the Democrat Party, the military industrial complex, Biden and Harris are frantically sending as much money to Ukraine to siphon off more into the money laundering operation. Now that FTX has been taken down, now that the Democrat political bribery network has been exposed, now that the SEC has said, don't do that. Now the DOJ said, don't cover that. They're frantically trying to get as much money to Ukraine and making you believe that this is anything more than a disgusting weaponization of Russian life, Ukrainian life, in order to weaken the Russian military and make profits for NATO and hand over that industry. So Trump won't like the idea of this, and Zelensky won't like the idea of this, so this becomes a really important one, and that is the test. That is the test. Americans have had $300 billion of inflation based upon this CIA strategy of NATO expansion. Remember, the same forces, NATO, wants to give basically the Middle East to Israel as well. They want to support the military-industrial complex. That is the approach. And Israel is pro-war. Zelensky is pro-war. And they want American troops to die for them. And they want America to pay the bill. And they want everyday Americans to not look after their own infrastructure and have a deeper cost of living crisis in order to try and protect the petrodollar to make sure Saudi Arabia doesn't give some of the yuan dollar. And we have diplomacy instead. Remember, NATO is profiting from the war. That is the goal of NATO. NATO is profiting from the Middle East through Israel. NATO is profiting from Ukraine via BlackRock's pro-war policy. And BlackRock is the shareholder in all of the companies that benefit from this as well. And this is why the Democrats were pushing, a NATO expansion around China in order to try and push China to reunify with Taiwan, and all of the hawks that were pushing, saying, China's about to reunify, buy more weapons. Taiwan, buy more weapons. Philippines, buy more weapons. Japan, buy more weapons. Keep the whole Japan carry trade. Create inflation for your people. Lend us free money that gets reinvested into the American military industrial complex so that we can send you the money. The Fed can print it and we can create wealth inequality and lead to more homelessness within America and not invest in infrastructure so that the war hawks can benefit. And we want NATO expansion across Asia. But Trump wants to focus on what America did do before, when it had a state banking system, before the Federal Reserve. What did it used to do? It used to do tariffs, which led to an industrial trade. Unfortunately, this is going to be very inflationary for America in terms of a double whammy with the Federal Reserve reducing rates, with tariffs being implemented. So buckle up, America, because tariffs is also a way of reducing the amount of income tax, but it is very tricky in today's environment. So buckle up, America. And why do you think the Federal Reserve is reducing rates? So it can weaponize and hold the US economy to ransom if America tries to implement an end the Fed bill or tries to continue with its Bitcoin strategic reserve asset. You think the Fed is a good player? Well, you got everything you need. We just need to expose it. We need to keep our freedom of speech. Fortunately, Elon Musk is on the efficiency team. And I know that all of the data behind X is going back to artificial intelligence, going back to Israel through this very clever Silicon Valley money laundering scheme that has this Israel first policy rather than an American first policy. But these are the things we need to be aware of in the macro side and the geopolitical side. But again, I will say it again. I will celebrate again. And this is the most important thing. Whatever Trump does next, he may continue the genocide. But the perpetrators of the genocide, Biden and Harris, they lost. That is a loss for the deep state. They lost. And I know the genocide continues, and I cannot handle the starvation that's happening, the weaponization of food, the weaponization of the financial system, the weaponization of the media, the weaponization of Silicon Valley and artificial intelligence that is being used in order to take the weaponization of the American people and the dollar to fund this genocide. But now we focus on what Trump will do next. And if he continues it and he doesn't fight against it and he doesn't get us that peace, at least we will know that he is bought and he is compromised. And then we can move forward with the resistance movement against that. And America can finally realize how its system works. Change comes from here. That's why it was important to do this. And that's why it was important to expel Biden and Harris out of America so that we can get our end of Fed bill, we can get our Bitcoin strategic reserves. But I want you to have a warning. Trump is not the holy savior. He is an agent for change and for us to hold him to account. So please remember what I covered in previous Bitcoin Hard Talks. What did Trump do to implement a covert war in the Middle East in order to have his Israel first policy? Well, he gave the Golan Heights to Israel, which was an occupied Israeli territory, which heightened the war with Syria as well. He moved the U.S. embassy away from Tel Aviv over to Jerusalem in order to hand over Jerusalem, which was meant to be international territory based upon the peace treaties of Oslo Accords, and reversed all of those peace treaties, which is what heightened the Israelis in order to occupy and invade the mosque, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which led to the Al-Aqsa Mosque flood on October the 7th as a result of all the violence that resulted from that move. He occupied the oil fields in Syria. He said and did not co-opt, even though the Hillary Clinton emails on WikiLeaks said that ISIS is the Israeli intelligence service that was being utilized to fool the people into thinking you need to kill Muslims through other Mossad operations like 9/11 that Israel used in order to implement the war on terror, through American-funded operations like Al-Qaeda. All of that hidden thing He even then said that he was bombing ISIS, when we know what that means. He was bombing Syrians at the same time, because ISIS is an operation that is weaponized and militarized and used by Israel and Mossad. He also tore up the nuclear deal, which was the negotiation to say, you open up your military forces so that Iran, you don't end up a nuclear power. We pretend that Israel is not an illegal nuclear power. We won't sanction them, but let's do a deal rather than leading to further sanctions. Trump tore all that up. That led to the issues that we're having today. And that was all for Netanyahu, because Netanyahu could not think of a peace deal and a Middle East that worked between America and Iran. He sidestepped Iran by saying that there will be no Palestinian cause, and Abraham Accords will happen without peace in Iran. And Saudi Arabia then had to say, we can't do this deal without having a Palestinian solution, because without a Palestinian solution, there would be a revolution in Saudi Arabia, just like the people uprised and created a revolution within Iran in the first place, based upon the occupation of the American coup in 1953 and the Lebanese-American CIA coup of Lebanon in 1958 that led to all of this in the first place, and a revolution and resistance movement against the atrocities of Israel and them creating all of these groups. Now, remember all of this, because they're fooling you through control of media into thinking this is something that is not. And this is why, as you know, if you go to my blog and you watch the documentary Atrocity Inc., this is why Netanyahu benefited from October the 7th, ignored the intelligence, and wanted to escalate to get US into a war in order to get regime change in Iran, so that Netanyahu could put a puppet government in so that they could benefit from the oil that is needed and the natural gas in order to power all of this artificial intelligence that's needed into the future. So here is the question. Here is the test. Will Trump stand against Netanyahu? Will he do America first, or will he do Israel first? That is the question. And that is what we need to understand. And I choose to judge Trump on his merits this time, even though Trump could take us to a very different direction, because many people believe that Trump is the chosen one to give Israel the Greater Israel Project and get that central bank digital currency in Israel and get that artificial intelligence to power it and take out Silicon Valley and bankrupt the US through the operation that the Federal Reserve is setting up now by reducing rates, creating an inflationary environment, and hiking rates at the moment that it wants to grab the American economy by the kahunas if Trump dares go against the Israel first policy. Will he expose the deep state? Well, he released a video with a 10-step strategy for having complete exposure of the deep state. Will he fight against the Fed? Will he hedge with the Bitcoin strategic reserve asset strategy? Will he support and end the Fed strategy? Will he come up against the deep state? These are the questions. But as long as we know it, we can test him. We gave him the tools. We gave the education. There are all of us on X Spaces exposing the system. It's time to end it. America can do it. It can return to Constitution if it wants. Make sure you understand who he is employing right now. Mike Pompeo. WikiLeaks exposed him. He was the one that allowed all of these atrocities to happen. He was a part of the fake war on terror. He was a part of all of this fake operations. He is the agent for the deep state within America. Make sure you understand this. And what did Mike Pompeo do right after this? he announced that he is joining Ukraine Telecom Kyivstar. And that was what this was all about. It was all about corruption. And now he has got his cushy role working for BlackRock, using Ukraine to take over infrastructure, to take over the telecom industry, to implement Israel first policy using BlackRock's ownership of Ukraine. It was never about protecting Ukrainian civilians. It was never. It was a CIA leveraging NATO with Mossad operations in order to create tensions with Putin, to control the media, to manipulate people, to wash all that money back to BlackRock so that it could acquire all of the best assets of Ukraine, and it could get those cheap assets on the cheap, and it could then use and reward the corrupt politicians that took the bribes from AIPAC and the military-industrial complex and the banking lobby and the big pharma lobby that needs the oil, that needs the chemicals in order to support the industry, to support the military-industrial complex, because Ukraine was the third largest debtor to the IMF, as well as Lebanon, and as well as the countries that are being taken over and regime changes like Venezuela right now, where the CIA failed. I hope you recognize this for what it is right now. And remember who underwrote the whole thing? The Bank of England, where all this gold came from in the first place when the Rothschild family started taking over and implemented that shift of all the gold from colonialism over to America during World War I. Who are the companies that are going to benefit from the military-industrial complex? Well, it's Boeing. It's General Dynamics. It's Lockheed Martin. And now the American people have sent $300 billion into this successful monetary operation that is coming straight back to the profits of that military-industrial complex and scamming the world into bankrupting themselves. This could have housed every single homeless person within America if it wanted. It could have created all the infrastructure to protect. It could have helped people during these natural disasters. And it's not even ended. What is the biggest amount of money? The rebuild of Ukraine, the rebuild of Gaza. And what do you think that rebuild will look like? It will be smart surveillance state built on central bank digital currencies if the deep state gets its way. Because that's why BlackRock has all of the shares and voting rights of all the ETFs. And that's why they want you to put your Bitcoin with BlackRock rather than own it in self-custody. All of these companies are owned by BlackRock with your pension and your endowment and your college fees and your insurance contributions. And guess what? All of this funding wasn't given to Ukraine. It was a loan. Why is it a loan? It's never going to be repaid. Of course, it's not going to be repaid because it is collateralized by the assets of the country. So that what can they do during the rebuild? They can implement extreme austerity so that the Ukrainian people are putting to homelessness now that BlackRock owns approximately 47% of the country because it has collateralized all of it through these loan agreements. And who's doing the rebuild? Who got the contracts as part of the loan? DuPont, Cargill, Monsanto. And what is it collateralized against? The richest farmland in the world. It is basically the breadbasket of Europe. So it can hijack the grains of Europe, which created that cost of living crisis that the ECB then inflated based upon a CIA operation to blow up Nord Stream so that the European economy gets to where it is today, wrecked. And guess what's going to save it? The European central banks, digital euro, and digital ID through a banking crisis. The land that holds all this wheat that caused the cost of living crisis from these operations, about 500,000 children over the time have been killed to protect this land, war after war after war. And BlackRock gets all the contracts to rebuild. What other contracts does BlackRock have? Did you know that BlackRock has the contract in order to manage the monetary policy of the Federal Reserve as well? In fact, it was the one that decided that Lehman Brothers should go bust and JP Morgan should get free money from the Fed in order to acquire it, and that they should take out Bear Stearns. It was BlackRock's technology that was implementing that data to make it look like all of these minions of the Federal Reserve are the most intelligent people. It was BlackRock's model, Aladdin, that is controlling that and making those decisions. It is BlackRock's model that has the contract with the Treasury to implement their fiscal policy based upon BlackRock's model. So you got BlackRock controlling the fiscal side. You got BlackRock controlling the monetary policy side. You got the Federal Reserve, which is a private company that is in this for its shareholders, which is the banks, which is re-hyphening all of that money through Israel while it is working against America's interests, getting it into a war to fuel the military-industrial complex so that it can bankrupt America and do what it did to the UK. Watch and learn, and you have all the tools to fight against it. BlackRock and the Fed are implementing an Israel-first policy. It's not an America-first policy. Have no further look at Peter Thiel. Remember Peter Thiel, the guy that came up on the space that I was in? Executed the crash of the market so that he could buy Silicon Valley. That Silicon Valley bank ended up being restructured through FDIC, through the Fed, and it took out all the crypto banks. And then Bill Ackman came up on the same space and said, guarantee the market, FDIC, guarantee the market. The whole system's about to crash, because Peter Thiel asked himself to, he was going to take all those Silicon Valley companies and say, withdraw your funds now. I'm withdrawing mine. Crash the bank. Then the bank suddenly hikes rates before that, which is what caused the problem in the first place. What's his company? The public company Palantir, doing record profits right now. That Palantir is using artificial intelligence that is fueling the military-industrial complex for Israel right now. It's deciding what civilians to kill based upon the algorithm of covering it up through Israeli-controlled media as well. Israel owns Congress through AIPAC and all of these other institutions. It owns the voting rights in all of the shares with these dual citizens. And Trump said that he wanted to make Israel great again before the election. Could it be because he couldn't get into president unless he said that? And now it is our job, we the people, to recognize it and free the world from the Federal Reserve. My message to you people in the geopolitical section, this may be crazy to you, but once you recognize it, you can stop covering up for it. And once you stop covering up for it, we can end the Fed once and for all, because it was never created to support America. It was created to turn America into communism. And the technology exists right now for communism on a blockchain, and there is a resistance movement against it. It is called Bitcoin, and a Bitcoin strategic reserve asset on Treasury's balance sheet. Even if you don't believe me, why not hedge? Just in case. Because maybe it might just expose that the Federal Reserve is no longer working in America's best interest. What did we have this week in the geopolitical section? The Russian foreign minister came out and he said that if Ukraine joins NATO, either Ukraine disappears or NATO does. And if that leads to a threat of Russia, they consider that a declaration of nuclear war. Iran has now said that it will use all available tools within its disposal to respond to Israel's attack. North Korea is now officially deployed with 10,000 troops on the front, which are fighting alongside Russia in the war against Ukraine, or NATO, let's call it. NATO has now confirmed this. NATO wants to escalate. NATO is saying, let's go further. Let's get more money from the Fed. And the hawks that were falling for it all were co-opted. Harris and Biden are out. Let's not let Trump do the same. Israel has now destroyed and damaged 5,000 homes and arrested over 10,800 Palestinians with no trial. They are hostages from West Bank, which has got nothing to do with Hamas. Lebanon is becoming a death zone with an illegal occupation, as well as turning it into Gaza. The genocide in Gaza is disgusting right now. They are starving Palestinians in the north, saying, we are going to bomb you. But they can't go down to the south anyway. They're getting a famine. They're getting no food. They are getting bombed. They are now being considered hostile. We are not even getting the numbers anymore. A publication said that 186,000 civilians, 70% women and children, with no food, no aid, no hospitals, no civilization. We are complicit in the bombing. 186K estimated dead. And there are people, that was in the July statistics. It's got a lot worse since then. You've got to understand and recognize what this is. Stop covering up for it. Being silent at this stage is complicity. And America has all the tools that it needs because America paid for this, but it wasn't America. It was the Fed and the CIA. And you're falling for it because your media is controlled. End the occupation. Just so you know as well, so there was a little bit in terms of diplomacy, and this can't come soon enough as far as I'm concerned. Trump has accepted the Russian President Putin's offer for a call to discuss ending the war in Ukraine. There is no NATO solution. There is no military solution. There is only a BlackRock and Russian solution now. And they need to negotiate it. And don't listen to Biden. Don't listen to Harris. Don't listen to Boris Johnson that was put there to make this so much worse than it is. And don't believe them that they care about Ukrainian lives because they know that they can't be won. Stand up against the CIA. Defund NATO. Defund Israel. They will have to engage in diplomacy. That will lead to a one-state solution, which is equal rights for all, because all of this has been a resistance against the occupations. Do a nuclear deal. Do the same with Israel. Let Israel and Iran have a nuclear deal. Open them up to inspection. Don't allow them to have a free reign. Classify AIPAC as a foreign agent. That's what JFK tried to do. Release the files. Release the 9/11 files. Release the Epstein files. Release the JFK files. Release the assassination files. Let the world know that it was Mossad in order to fool you. End the Fed. That was JFK's plan. And that's why Mossad assassinated him. That's why America needs a Bitcoin strategic reserve. Israel is building an AI central bank digital currency using Silicon Valley and a brain drain and fooling you into fighting war so American troops can fight for it because you have been fooled. Guess how they want to rebuild Palestine, as I said. They're going to do a complete control, smart city, full occupation, CBDC as a service, and export it around the world if they're allowed to do it with Palestine. But Palestine can rebuild with Bitcoin instead. It can build its own Bitcoin strategic reserve asset. It can implement money that is backed by collateral, that is also not having riba built into the system. It already had a system like that in the Lebanese one. The IDF blew it up. I covered that in previous episodes. Fight against the artificial intelligence, central bank digital currency, because you can bet your Bedlam dollar if they can do it to Palestine, they want to do it to us too. It's not about troops in the future. It's about technology. And so we must transition to this world of Bitcoin artificial intelligence and central bank digital currencies to better together. Always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. Many are going to get hurt. The majority are going to get hurt. Others are going to do really well. I want you to be on the right side of the change. I'd like to do it evolutionary with all the tools that are in front of us, using this change that exists today to do it with peace, love, and unity. The deep state wants to do it with World War III. And the deep state will make a lot of people get hurt. Let's do it the right way. Don't fall for the psyop. Take back control of the media. End the Fed. And you can do that in a peaceful way through a Bitcoin strategic reserve asset. If you don't do it, another country will. And I love the American Constitution before the Federal Reserve occupied your country. That's everything for Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 63. I'll see you this time next week for Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 64. Join me on simondixon.com and sign up to Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. Share, retweet, make sure as many people get this message, get this information. You and we, the people, can change as much as we can do. And I will dedicate my dying breath to that mission, as I have for 24 years, in exposing the Proof of Weapons network. Peace.